Welcome to The World in English, the podcast where we explore fascinating topics from around the globe while expanding your English vocabulary and cultural understanding. I'm your host, Mido, and I'm thrilled to have you joining us today for another journey through language and culture.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I hope you've had a great week wherever you are in the world. Whether you're listening to this during your morning commute, while making dinner, or maybe while out for a walk, I'm really glad you've chosen to spend this time with us. Today, we're diving into a topic that touches virtually every person's life at some point: school. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. School? That's a basic topic, isn't it? But here's what makes it so fascinating. The educational experience varies dramatically depending on where you grow up, and these differences reveal so much about cultural values, social priorities, and how different societies prepare their young people for the future. Over the next half hour or so, we'll explore different educational approaches from around the world, discuss the various challenges and innovations shaping modern education, and delve into some truly fascinating school traditions from various cultures. We'll examine everything from Finland's revolutionary pedagogical methods to Singapore's rigorous academic system, from the rise of alternative education models to the integration of technology in 21st century classrooms. And of course, as always, we'll be practicing some advanced English vocabulary along the way, the kind of language that will help you discuss complex topics with confidence and nuance. But before we jump into all of that, I'd like you to take a moment and think back to your own school days. Close your eyes if you can, though maybe not if you're driving, and go back to one particularly memorable moment from your time at school. What comes to mind? Is it perhaps sitting in a traditional classroom, the smell of chalk dust in the air, nervously waiting to be called upon by your teacher? Or maybe it's the exhilaration of performing in a school play, or competing in a sports match, or presenting your research at a science fair. Perhaps it's the anxiety of a rigorous exam period, those late nights studying with textbooks spread across your desk, trying to retain information about algebraic equations or historical dates or chemical formulas. Or maybe, just maybe, your most vivid school memory has nothing to do with academics at all. Maybe it's a moment of friendship, a conversation with a mentor who changed your perspective, or an extracurricular activity that revealed a hidden talent or passion you never knew you had. For me personally, I remember one particular afternoon in secondary school when my literature teacher, Mrs. Chen, had us analyze a poem in a completely unconventional way. Instead of sitting in rows dissecting the text line by line, she had us go outside to the school courtyard, sit under the trees, and simply experience the poem through multiple readings. She wanted us to hear how the words sounded, to feel the rhythm, to let the imagery wash over us before we tried to intellectually scrutinize it. That experience completely transformed my relationship with literature and showed me that learning doesn't always have to happen within four walls. The reason I'm sharing this is because school is so much more than just the curriculum we study or the examinations we take. It's a formative experience that shapes how we think, how we collaborate with others, and often what trajectory our lives will take. And as we'll discover today, the way different cultures approach this formative experience tells us something profound about their values and aspirations. So with that in mind, let's begin our exploration of school systems around the world. When we think about education, many of us naturally default to the system we grew up in. We assume that the way we learned, the structure of the school day, the teaching methodology, the approach to assessment, is simply how school works everywhere. But the reality is far more diverse and fascinating than that. Let's start our global tour in Finland, a country that has gained international recognition for what many educational researchers describe as a revolutionary approach to learning. Finnish schools operate on a pedagogical philosophy that might surprise those familiar with more traditional, test-focused systems. In Finland, children don't actually start formal schooling until age 7, significantly later than in many countries. The rationale behind this is grounded in empirical evidence about childhood development. Finnish educators argue that young children learn best through play and exploration, and that rushing them into formal academics before they're developmentally ready can actually be counterproductive. Once they do begin school, Finnish students face remarkably little standardized testing, especially in comparison to countries like the United States, South Korea, or China, where high-stakes examinations are a defining feature of the educational experience. Instead, Finnish teachers, who are all required to hold master's degrees in education, use continuous assessment methods to evaluate student progress. They focus on facilitating understanding rather than memorization, and they emphasize analytical thinking and creativity rather than the ability to perform well on multiple-choice tests. Class sizes tend to be small, the curriculum is comprehensive but not overwhelming, and there's a strong emphasis on interdisciplinary learning, connecting subjects together rather than treating them as isolated silos of knowledge. Perhaps most tellingly, Finnish students consistently rank among the highest in the world in literacy, mathematics, and scientific proficiency, despite spending fewer hours in the classroom than their peers in many other nations. Now, let's contrast this with Singapore, which has developed an education system that, while equally successful by international metrics, operates on different principles. Singapore's approach is rigorous and highly structured. Students face a comprehensive curriculum that demands significant dedication and study. The methodology here emphasizes mastery, the idea that students should achieve genuine competency in foundational skills before moving on to more advanced material. Singaporean schools are well known for their emphasis on mathematics and science education, and their students regularly score at the top of international assessments like PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment. However, this success comes with trade-offs. Students often face considerable academic pressure, long study hours, and significant emphasis on examination performance. The system is meticulous in its approach to curriculum design and teacher training, but critics sometimes argue that it may not leave sufficient room for creativity, or the kind of student-directed learning that characterizes the Finnish model. What's exemplary about Singapore's system, though, is its consistent results. The methodology has been so successful that educators from around the world travel to Singapore to observe their teaching practices and attempt to adapt them for their own contexts. Beyond these two examples, we should also acknowledge the growing prevalence of alternative education models. You've probably heard of Montessori schools, which emphasize self-directed learning and hands-on activities. The Montessori methodology, developed by Italian physician and educator Maria Montessori in the early 20th century, focuses on following the child's natural interests and developmental stages rather than imposing a one-size-fits-all curriculum. Similarly, Waldorf schools, also called Steiner schools after their founder Rudolf Steiner, emphasize artistic expression, practical skills, and holistic development. Waldorf educators avoid digital technology in early childhood education and instead focus on fostering imagination, creativity, and social development through storytelling, music, and craft activities. And then we have homeschooling, which has seen remarkable growth in recent years, particularly accelerated by the global pandemic. Homeschooling parents take direct responsibility for their children's education, often using a combination of structured curricula, online resources, and real-world experiences to facilitate learning. The flexibility this provides can be propitious for children with unique learning needs, or families who travel frequently, or those who want to integrate their cultural or religious values more directly into their children's education. Each of these approaches, from Finland's student-centered model to Singapore's rigorous structure, from Montessori's developmental focus to homeschooling's flexibility, represents a different answer to fundamental questions. What is education for? What should young people learn? How can we best facilitate their development into capable, thoughtful adults? And underlying all of these systems is the question of university preparation, how we prepare students for higher education. Some countries, like Germany, have tracked systems where students are directed towards either academic or vocational pathways relatively early. Others, like the United States, maintain comprehensive high schools where all students follow similar courses before specializing at the university level. Each approach reflects different assumptions about talent, opportunity, and social mobility. Speaking of different approaches to learning, let's explore what makes school experiences so memorable and how academic culture varies around the world.
Now, while we've been discussing different pedagogical approaches and curriculum structures, I think it's important to remember that school is about so much more than just what happens in the classroom during formal lessons. The culture of school life, the extracurricular activities, the social dynamics, the traditions and rituals, often shape students just as profoundly as their academic studies. Let's start with extracurricular activities, which play vastly different roles depending on where you are in the world. In the United States, for example, extracurriculars are absolutely central to the school experience. American high schools offer an enormous array of options: sports teams, debate clubs, drama productions, student government, newspaper and yearbook committees, music ensembles, robotics teams, and countless others. Students are actively encouraged to participate in multiple activities, and university admissions offices explicitly look for this kind of involvement when evaluating applications. The American philosophy here is that extracurricular participation develops important qualities: leadership, teamwork, time management, resilience, and what we might call cultural competency, or the ability to navigate diverse social situations. A student who plays on the basketball team, participates in the school debate club, and volunteers with a community organization is demonstrating their ability to balance multiple commitments and collaborate with different groups of people. In contrast, in many East Asian countries, extracurricular activities, while present, often take a back seat to academic preparation. In South Korea, for instance, it's not unusual for students to attend school during the day and then continue to private tutoring academies called hugwons in the evening, leaving little time for clubs or sports. The prioritization here is different. Academic proficiency and examination performance are seen as the most critical elements of the school experience. Japan presents an interesting middle ground. Japanese schools do emphasize extracurricular participation, but in a more structured way than in the United States. Students typically join one club, perhaps the baseball club or the calligraphy club or the brass band, and that club becomes a defining part of their identity. The commitment is serious. Club activities often occur 6 days a week, and students are expected to demonstrate dedication and continuous improvement. This approach reflects broader Japanese cultural values around perseverance, group harmony, and the importance of mastering a particular skill through repeated practice. Now, let's address something that affects students worldwide, regardless of their school system: academic pressure. The experience of balancing grades, social relationships, personal interests, and mental health is something millions of students grapple with every day, though the specific nature and intensity of this pressure varies considerably. In highly competitive systems, whether we're talking about South Korea's university entrance examinations, China's Gaokao, India's various competitive exams, or even the international baccalaureate program offered in schools worldwide, students often face extraordinary demands on their time and energy. The trajectory of their entire adult lives can feel like it depends on their performance during these critical assessment periods. This kind of pressure can certainly motivate students to demonstrate remarkable proficiency and develop strong study habits and analytical thinking skills. However, it can also take a significant toll on mental health and well-being.
Educational psychologists and researchers are increasingly examining how we can maintain high academic standards while also ensuring that young people develop the resilience and adaptability they'll need throughout their lives, not just for examinations. Some schools are responding by incorporating explicit instruction in stress management, mindfulness, and emotional regulation. Others are rethinking homework policies, restructuring the school day to include more breaks, or providing counseling services and mental health support. These initiatives recognize that cognitive development, the growth of thinking and reasoning abilities, doesn't happen in isolation from emotional and social development. Speaking of school culture, let's talk about traditions, because these often reveal fascinating insights into what different societies value. School uniforms provide a perfect example. In Britain and many Commonwealth countries, as well as in Japan, South Korea, and numerous other nations, school uniforms are essentially universal. The rationale typically centers on equality, the idea that uniforms minimize visible socioeconomic differences between students, and on fostering a sense of collective identity and institutional pride. In countries like the United States or France, however, uniforms are less common in public schools, reflecting different values around individual expression and personal choice. The debate over uniforms touches on fundamental questions about the balance between conformity and individuality, institutional identity and personal freedom. Then we have graduation ceremonies, which are celebrated quite differently around the world. American graduations are elaborate affairs. Students wear caps and gowns, walk across the stage to receive diplomas, move their tassels from one side to the other, and often throw their caps in the air at the ceremony's conclusion. There are speeches about the future, about dreams and aspirations, about the graduating class's potential to change the world. In Germany, the Abitur celebration includes traditions like the Abi-Streich, where graduating students essentially take over the school for a day, organizing games and activities for younger students. In Norway, graduating students celebrate with weeks of festivities called russefeiring, wearing distinctive colored overalls and participating in various traditional activities and challenges. British schools with house systems, famously portrayed in literature and popular culture, add another layer to school identity. Students are sorted into houses that compete throughout the year in academics, sports, and other activities, fostering both friendly rivalry and house loyalty. This system, which has been adopted by some schools worldwide, creates smaller communities within larger institutions and provides opportunities for student leadership through positions like house captain. Now let's turn our attention to something that's rapidly transforming school culture everywhere: technology integration. The modern classroom looks dramatically different from classrooms even 20 years ago. Interactive whiteboards have replaced traditional chalkboards, students submit assignments digitally, teachers use learning management systems to communicate with students and parents, and digital literacy has become as fundamental as traditional literacy. But technology's role in education varies considerably. Some schools have embraced one-to-one device programs, where every student has a laptop or tablet. Others maintain computer labs, but limit screen time during regular classes. Some educators facilitate learning through sophisticated educational software that provides personalized instruction and immediate feedback. Others worry about students' ability to concentrate, to engage in deep reading, or to develop handwriting and other traditional skills. The COVID-19 pandemic dramatically accelerated these discussions, as schools worldwide were forced to rapidly transition to remote learning. This experience revealed both the tremendous potential of educational technology, its ability to maintain learning continuity during disruptions, to connect students with resources and experts anywhere in the world, to provide flexible pacing for different learners, and its limitations. Many educators and students found that remote learning couldn't fully replicate the social interaction, the spontaneous discussions, the mentoring relationships, and the sense of community that characterize in-person schooling. Finally, I want to touch on international perspectives and cultural diversity in schools. Student exchange programs, international schools, and increasingly diverse student populations have made many schools genuinely multicultural environments. Students who participate in exchange programs, spending a semester or year studying in another country, often describe it as a transformative experience that develops cultural competency, adaptability, and a broader worldview. International schools that follow curricula like the International Baccalaureate explicitly aim to develop internationally minded people who can engage with global challenges. These institutions bring together students from dozens of different countries and create environments where cultural exchange happens naturally through daily interaction. This diversity can enrich everyone's educational experience. Students learn to collaborate with peers from different backgrounds, to consider multiple perspectives on historical events and contemporary issues, and to communicate across cultural differences. These are precisely the kinds of skills that prepare young people for an interconnected world where the ability to work with diverse teams and understand different viewpoints is increasingly valuable. Of course, creating genuinely inclusive environments where all students feel valued requires sustained effort. Schools must consider how their curricula represent different cultures and histories, how their teaching methods accommodate different learning styles and communication norms, and how they address instances of prejudice or discrimination when they arise. Now, let's examine some of the challenges and innovations shaping education today and think about where schools might be headed in the future.
As we've been exploring different school systems and cultures, I've been painting a picture of education as this rich, diverse landscape of approaches and philosophies. But I think it's important that we also address honestly some of the significant challenges facing education today, as well as some of the innovative solutions that educators, policymakers, and technology developers are proposing. Let's start with what's often called the digital divide. This term refers to the gap between those who have access to modern information and communication technology and those who don't. During the pandemic, when schools moved online, this divide became starkly visible. Students from affluent families typically had personal devices, reliable high-speed internet, and quiet spaces to study. But millions of students worldwide lacked one or more of these essentials. Some attended online classes on smartphones with tiny screens. Others shared a single computer among several siblings. Some had no internet access at all and couldn't participate in remote learning whatsoever. Even as schools have returned to in-person instruction, the digital divide remains a fundamental equity issue. In an era where digital literacy is becoming as essential as traditional literacy, students without access to technology are at a significant disadvantage. This isn't just about having devices. It's about the propitious circumstances that allow young people to develop technological skills, to access vast online educational resources, to learn coding and computational thinking, to prepare for careers in an increasingly digital economy. Addressing this requires substantial investment in infrastructure and resources, particularly in rural areas and economically disadvantaged communities. Some countries have made this a national priority. Others are leaving it largely to individual schools or districts, resulting in tremendous variation in access. Now, let's talk about standardized testing, which remains one of the most contentious issues in education. Proponents argue that standardized tests provide objective data about student learning, allow for comparisons across schools and districts, and hold schools accountable for educational outcomes. They substantiate their arguments with empirical evidence, showing that well-designed assessments can identify achievement gaps and inform instructional improvements. Critics, however, point to numerous problems. They argue that standardized tests often measure a narrow range of skills and knowledge, that they can't adequately assess creativity, critical thinking, or collaborative abilities. They note that extensive test preparation can crowd out more meaningful learning experiences. Perhaps most seriously, they highlight how standardized testing can exacerbate educational inequality. Students from privileged backgrounds often have access to test preparation resources that others lack,
and teachers in high-poverty schools may feel compelled to focus on test preparation at the expense of enriching curriculum. The debate over standardized testing really gets at fundamental questions about how we define educational success and how we can fairly assess student learning. Some educators advocate for more comprehensive assessment approaches that include portfolios of student work, project-based demonstrations of learning, and other methods that might more authentically capture what students know and can do. Another critical challenge is teacher burnout and retention. Teaching has always been demanding work, but in recent years, the pressures have intensified. Teachers are often asked to address not just academic instruction, but also students' social and emotional needs, to integrate ever-evolving technology, to differentiate instruction for diverse learners, to maintain extensive communication with parents, and to adapt to frequent policy changes and curriculum reforms. The result? Many talented educators are leaving the profession, creating teacher shortages in numerous countries and subject areas. This is not a problem we can simply ignore. Teachers are absolutely central to educational quality. Their expertise, their dedication, their ability to facilitate learning and inspire students, these factors profoundly influence educational outcomes. When we lose experienced teachers or struggle to attract capable people into the profession, students suffer. Addressing teacher burnout requires multiple approaches: more competitive compensation, better working conditions, genuine support from administrators, more reasonable workload expectations, and greater professional autonomy. Teachers, after all, are highly trained professionals with specialized pedagogical knowledge. When we treat them as such and provide them with the resources and respect they deserve, everyone benefits. But let's shift now from challenges to innovations, because despite these difficulties, there's also tremendous creativity and energy in the education sector right now. One of the most discussed innovations is artificial intelligence in education. AI-powered platforms can provide personalized learning experiences that adapt to each student's pace and level of understanding. If a student is struggling with a particular mathematical concept, the system can provide additional practice and explanation. If a student has mastered something quickly, the system can move them ahead to more challenging material. This kind of personalized learning has been a goal of educators for generations, but it's been nearly impossible to implement when one teacher is responsible for 25 or 30 students. AI tools potentially allow us to give every student a learning experience tailored to their specific needs, strengths, and interests. They can provide immediate feedback, identify gaps in understanding before they become serious problems, and free teachers to focus on the kinds of high-level instruction and mentoring that humans do best. But we must also scrutinize these tools carefully. Who's developing them, and what assumptions are built into their algorithms? How do we ensure they're genuinely enhancing learning rather than just providing elaborate digital worksheets? How do we maintain the human relationships and social learning that are so central to education? These are questions we're still working through as a field. Another significant innovation is the move toward skill-based and competency-based curricula. Traditional education has largely been organized around seat time. Students spend a certain number of hours in algebra class or history class, and if they show up and complete the work, they pass. Competency-based education flips this model. Students advance based on demonstrated mastery of specific skills or knowledge, regardless of how long it takes them to get there. This approach has some compelling advantages. It acknowledges that students learn at different rates and in different ways. It emphasizes genuine proficiency rather than just completing assignments. It can provide clearer goals and more meaningful feedback. Some schools have restructured entirely around this model, organizing learning around competencies rather than traditional courses and grade levels. We're also seeing innovations in how we think about what should be taught. There's growing recognition that in a rapidly changing world, the specific factual knowledge students memorize may be less important than their ability to find, evaluate, and apply information. This has led to increased emphasis on what are sometimes called 21st century skills: critical thinking, creativity, communication, collaboration, digital literacy, and adaptability. Some education systems are developing curricula that are more interdisciplinary and project-based, where students might work on complex, real-world problems that require them to apply concepts from science, mathematics, economics, and social studies, while also developing research, communication, and teamwork skills. The future of education likely involves hybrid learning models that combine the best elements of in-person and online instruction. The pandemic forced schools to move online rapidly, often with mixed results, but it also demonstrated possibilities. Students might attend school in person for collaborative projects, laboratory work, arts and athletics, and other activities that benefit from physical presence, while accessing some content and instruction online in ways that allow for greater flexibility and personalization. We're also seeing a paradigm shift toward viewing education as a lifelong endeavor rather than something that ends when you finish formal schooling. The trajectory of careers has changed dramatically. It's increasingly common for people to change careers multiple times throughout their working lives, which means they need opportunities for ongoing learning and skill development. Universities and colleges are expanding continuing education programs, online platforms are making learning accessible at any age, and employers are investing more in employee training and development. Finally, I want to touch on how different countries are addressing educational equity, ensuring that all students, regardless of their background, have access to quality education. This is perhaps the most fundamental challenge in education and approaches vary widely. Some countries have implemented comprehensive reform aimed at reducing disparities between schools in wealthy and poor areas. Others are experimenting with different funding models, with programs to attract talented teachers to underserved schools, with early childhood education initiatives designed to address achievement gaps before they widen. The evidence from educational research is clear. High-quality education can be transformative, providing pathways to opportunity for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. But achieving this requires sustained commitment, adequate resources, and what we might call perspicacious analysis.
So, we've covered a lot of ground today, from Finland's student-centered approach to Singapore's rigorous methodology, from the role of extracurricular activities to the impact of technology, from challenges like the digital divide to innovations like AI-powered personalized learning. And I imagine that throughout this conversation, you've been reflecting on your own educational experiences, comparing them to what we've discussed, perhaps thinking about what you wish had been different or what you're grateful for. Here's a question I'd like you to consider. If you could import one educational innovation or practice from another country into your own school system, what would it be? Maybe you're drawn to Finland's emphasis on play-based early childhood education and minimal testing. Perhaps you appreciate Japan's approach to extracurricular commitment and skill mastery. Maybe you're intrigued by the project-based learning happening in some innovative schools, or by competency-based progression models, or by the emphasis on work-life balance and student well-being that some systems are prioritizing. I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts on this. You can share them with us on social media using the hashtag #WorldInEnglish. Tell us where you're from, describe your educational experience, and share what innovation you'd like to see implemented. Some of the most fascinating insights come from our listeners who bring perspectives from all corners of the world, and I always learn something from your contributions. And while you're at it, if you have a particularly memorable school story, maybe a teacher who changed your life, or a challenging project that taught you something unexpected, or a tradition from your school that you think others would find interesting, please share that too. Education is one of those universal experiences that also varies so dramatically across cultures, and I think we all benefit from hearing each other's stories. You can find us on most social media platforms. Just search for the World in English podcast, and we try to respond to as many comments and messages as possible. Building this community of engaged language learners from around the world is one of my favorite aspects of hosting this podcast.
Before we wrap up today, let's do our quick language tip segment. Today, I want to share some useful expressions for discussing academic topics or participating in educational discussions. These are the kinds of phrases that will help you sound more sophisticated and nuanced when you're talking about learning, research, or intellectual topics. First, when you want to discuss something from an educational or teaching perspective, you can say, from a pedagogical standpoint. For example, from a pedagogical standpoint, project-based learning helps students develop critical thinking skills. This signals that you're considering the teaching and learning aspects specifically. If you're discussing research or data, try this phrase. The empirical evidence suggests, for instance, the empirical evidence suggests that smaller class sizes lead to better outcomes, particularly for younger students. This phrase indicates you're basing your claim on actual research data rather than just opinion. When talking about how something enables or supports learning, use "this approach facilitates deeper learning." For example, this approach facilitates deeper learning by encouraging students to make connections between concepts. The word facilitate is very useful in academic contexts. It means to make something easier or to enable it to happen. And finally, when discussing student achievement, you can say, students must demonstrate proficiency in. For instance, before moving to advanced mathematics, students must demonstrate proficiency in algebraic reasoning. This is more sophisticated than saying students must be good at or students must know. These phrases might feel a bit formal at first, but as you incorporate them into your speaking and writing, they'll become natural. They're particularly useful if you're studying at an English language university, participating in professional discussions, or writing academic papers. So, we've reached the end of today's episode, and what a journey it's been through the world of education. Before we say goodbye, let me take just a moment to synthesize some of the key insights we've explored together. First and foremost, I hope today's conversation has highlighted just how remarkably diverse educational approaches are around the globe. From Finland's student-centered pedagogy that minimizes testing and maximizes play-based learning, to Singapore's rigorous, comprehensive curriculum that produces consistently high achievement, to alternative models like Montessori and Waldorf that prioritize different aspects of child development, there is no single right way to educate young people. Each approach reflects different cultural values, different assumptions about what education is for, and different priorities about what skills and knowledge matter most. We've also explored how school is about so much more than academics. The extracurricular activities students participate in, the traditions and rituals they experience, the social relationships they form, the way they learn to manage pressure and develop resiliency. All of these elements shape who they become. School culture varies dramatically around the world, and understanding these differences helps us appreciate how education reflects and reinforces broader societal values. And we've examined both the challenges facing education today and some of the innovative solutions being developed. Whether it's addressing the digital divide to ensure equitable access to technology, rethinking standardized testing to capture a fuller picture of student learning, supporting teachers to prevent burnout, leveraging AI to provide personalized instruction, or developing competency-based approaches that allow students to progress at their own pace, there's tremendous creative energy in the field of education right now. Looking at these issues through an international lens reveals something important. We can learn from each other. When we scrutinize different educational systems and analyze what makes them effective, we discover exemplary practices that might be adapted for other contexts. Of course, we can't simply copy and paste the system from one country to another. Cultural context matters enormously, but we can absolutely draw inspiration from successful approaches elsewhere. Let me also briefly highlight some of the advanced vocabulary we've been using throughout today's conversation. We've talked about pedagogical approaches, that's the teaching methods and educational philosophy. We've discussed rigorous curricula and comprehensive assessments. We've used words like facilitate, meaning to make something easier or to enable it to happen, and demonstrate proficiency in, meaning to show that you have skill or competency in something. We've also explored concepts like interdisciplinary learning, which connects different subjects together, and extracurricular activities, which happen outside the regular academic curriculum. We've considered empirical evidence, that's data and research findings, and talked about the need to substantiate arguments with solid evidence and to scrutinize data carefully. These aren't just vocabulary words to memorize, they're tools for thinking and communicating about complex topics with nuance and precision. As you continue your English learning journey, you'll find that having this kind of sophisticated vocabulary allows you to participate in more substantive conversations and to express subtle distinctions in meaning. Finally, I want to leave you with this thought. Education shapes not just individual lives, but entire societies. The way we educate young people influences what kind of adults they become, what careers they pursue, how they think about problems, how they relate to people different from themselves, and what values they carry forward. That's why these conversations about education matter so much. They're ultimately conversations about what kind of world we want to create and what kind of people we hope to become. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. Whether this is your first time listening to The World in English or you've been with us since the beginning, I'm genuinely grateful for your attention and your engagement with these ideas. Before you go, I have one more question for you to ponder, and please do share your answer on social media. What was your most challenging school subject, and how did you eventually master it? Or if you're still struggling with it, what strategies are you trying? Learning is a lifelong process, and we all face subjects or skills that don't come easily. Sometimes hearing how others approach their challenges can give us new ideas for our own learning journey. And of course, if you've enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing to The World in English wherever you listen to podcasts. We release new episodes every week, each one exploring our fascinating world while helping you develop advanced English skills. Subscribing ensures you won't miss any of our conversations, and it really helps other language learners discover the podcast too. You can find us on most social media platforms. Just search for The World in English podcast, and we try to respond to as many comments and messages as possible. Building this community of engaged language learners from around the world is one of my favorite aspects of hosting this podcast. Until next week, keep learning, keep exploring, keep asking questions about the world around you. Remember, every conversation is an opportunity to practice. Every new topic you explore expands your vocabulary, and every cultural perspective you encounter enriches your understanding. This has been The World in English. I'm Mito, and I'll talk to you next time.